Welcome to lecture video number 3 on biopsychology. So where we left off is we were discussing the neurotransmitters, and I showed you this overview slide, and I told you I'm not going to do like a little mini talk on each one of these, but there are a couple of them that I want to draw your attention to some interesting links between biology and behavior and emotions when it comes to these neurotransmitters. But this is a good summary page that you can refer back to as a shortcut to remember the key function of each one. So, first we're going to talk about adrenaline. Adrenaline is the neurotransmitter that provides, a good shortcut to remember is it provides the energy behind fight or flight. Adrenaline is only released during periods of perceived threats, right? We talked about how the amygdala is the center of your brain that kind of controls fear. When your amygdala is activated, you're going to start engaging in this fight or flight response, and your brain is going to release adrenaline. So it's released whenever there's a perceived threat to fight or flight. Now, one of the issues emotionally is that sometimes when we're in a state of heightened stress, heightened anxiety, our body can perceive emotional threats as adrenaline needing threats. So whenever you have sustained periods of stress, your adrenaline cycle is continuously going. Like it's going. Whenever you have that constant adrenaline, that's what a lot of people refer to as anxiety, that constant feeling of like being on edge and having nervous energy and I need to be doing something. And like if you've ever had that feeling of if you're super stressed out about something, if you're studying for a test, or if you've gotten into an argument with a loved one and you know they're upset with you and you have a lot of like stress and negative feelings related to that. If you've ever had that feeling of nervous energy that goes along with that, like I want to get up and do something. I want to go for a run. I want to go do something. Like you feel like you have all this nervous energy that you need to run off. That's because of that adrenaline. Because even though the threat in your brain is nothing physical, right? It's not like you have this threat of I need to run from a lion, to go back to our last example. Your body is still kicking in with that fight or flight response. And so the feeling you get is I need to move, I need to run, I need to go do something. There's a lot of really interesting research also on the role of adrenaline in producing emotions of anger and the links between anxiety and anger. That's a really interesting field of study right now. But anyway, if you have a long-term adrenaline, they call it an adrenaline bath. If you have a long-term adrenaline bath going on in your brain because you have a prolonged period of stress, it can have a lot of negative effects on your body. To step back really quickly, if you've ever noticed that whenever you're feeling extremely stressed or extremely anxious and you start having an intense desire to control things, like maybe you're not normally a quote-unquote control freak, but you sometimes get that way if you're stressed out or anxious, that's also an effect of that adrenaline because your body wants to return to normal. Adrenaline is supposed to be a short-term burst to get you out of danger. But when it's drawn on and you're feeling that way for hours or for days, your body wants to figure out what do I need to change in my environment to control this, to make this threat go away. So if you find yourself feeling a greater need for control whenever you're having feelings of stress and anxiety and having that like hyperactivation of nervous energy, that's actually a few steps down the line, like directly related to the impact of adrenaline on your body. So if you bathe your brain in adrenaline for long periods of time. Sorry about that. The mailman delivered a package and my dog decided that we were in grave danger because of it. Speaking of adrenaline and fight or flight. But anyway, so if you are bathing your brain in adrenaline for long periods of time, it can have a physical impact because that's not what your body wants to use adrenaline for. It can cause headaches. It can cause bowel or bladder issues. It's been linked to irritable bowel syndrome. It's also been linked to a spastic bladder, where you'll get that feeling of all of a sudden out of nowhere you have to pee. It's been linked to neck and back pain, to having burning or itching sensations on your skin, to getting rashes. It's been linked to insomnia, and also ringing in the ears. So if you've ever had that experience of, if you get really stressed studying for a test and your back starts hurting when you're stressed, or you start getting headaches when you're stressed, that's because of the adrenaline. That's because of the physical effects that a constant stream of adrenaline has on your body. The next one I want to talk about is dopamine. Dopamine is talked about very inaccurately in a lot of popular culture today. Dopamine is strongly linked to pleasure and motivation, but it's not the addiction hormone or the addiction neurotransmitter in the way that a lot of people make it out to be. It does play a role in addiction, and we're going to get to that. So dopamine is related to pleasure and motivation because you're expecting rewards. It's the feel-good neurotransmitter that's released when you achieve a goal. You have something that you're wanting to do, you've been working on it, you've been working towards it, and then when that hits and you actually achieve it, that feel-good, happy emotion that goes along with feeling accomplished, that's dopamine. It can also help you constrain your concentration because, again, it's most functioning when you're anticipating something, when you're working towards something. So it can help you to be able to constrain your concentration in order to focus on this thing you're motivated towards, on this good result that you're anticipating coming. There's actually been links between having lower dopamine levels and having attention problems. There's been some really interesting research on attention deficit disorders and dopamine functions within the brain. But the way it works, it's not really the pleasure hormone in that it's active because you're receiving pleasure. It's the pleasure hormone in that it's active when you're anticipating pleasure. One of my favorite summaries that I've ever seen of this came from Psychology Today. And the way that they worded it is, the role of dopamine is to say, hey, pay attention. This is about to feel good and you want to remember this so you can do it again, right? This is going good places. Remember how we got here. We want to repeat this. That's when dopamine is most active in your brain. So they've done really interesting research on this with drug use. One thing they found is that the dopamine surge in the brain is at its highest while acquiring the drug that you're addicted to, and in the moments just before the drug use, while you're like prepping to use it, than it is when the drug actually hits. They actually did some really interesting research on rats that they got addicted to heroin, because there's some people that's what their career is getting rats addicted to heroin. But there was this really interesting study where they got these rats addicted to heroin, and what they found when they were measuring the dopamine in the rats, that whenever the person like approached their cage with the heroin, with what they were about to give them, the dopamine surged in these rats. But it was not as high immediately after being given the dopamine. It was like the excitement factor was knowing, oh, it's coming, this is going to feel really good, and not when they actually had it. And they obviously compared that to rats that had never been given dopamine and were about to use it for the first time because, well, they didn't know yet that it was going to feel good. And this explains some of the component of the psychologically addictive properties of certain drugs. If maybe they're not physically addictive in the traditional sense that they can cause withdrawals and all that, but they're still psychologically addictive because you really enjoy the way that you feel when you're taking them. And it's that anticipation and that excitement of, oh, I know this is going to make me feel how I want to feel. It's also associated with pleasurable sensations and happiness. There are dopamine surges in your brain when you listen to music that you enjoy. Like, that's a way you can boost your dopamine, is listen to your favorite music. There's also dopamine surges during sexual arousal. One really interesting area of research right now, another potential idea for your final project, if you find this interesting, is they're doing a lot of research right now on the role of dopamine in pornography addiction. And I say addiction in with the air quotes because there's quite a bit of debate about if it's a true addiction or if it's just like a compulsive behavior, but there's a lot of really interesting research on how dopamine is playing a role in that persistent, compulsive, escalating pornography use, whether or not we're calling it an addiction. It's also a key player in other behavioral addictions, one of these being gambling. So research has shown that there is up to 10 times more dopamine released while gambling than while doing other naturally rewarding and pleasurable experiences. And the reason for this is, keep in mind, the dopamine surge is when you're anticipating a reward, when you're anticipating something good or pleasurable happening. A sure thing has less anticipatory excitement than a gamble. If I'm sitting at a table playing blackjack and that next flip, that next card could be the thing that wins me X amount of money, that there's more anticipation there. There's more edge of my seat, what's going to happen, than if I'm getting ready to do something that I know how it's going to end up. If I'm going to go do a pleasurable activity that I already know how this is going to go. So that idea of it being a gamble releases an increased amount of dopamine. And that's part of the reason why people will label gambling as an addiction, because there's actually those brain mechanisms going on that can say, well, yeah, here's why people keep doing this. Dopamine has also been linked to compulsive shopping, compulsive buying, shopping addiction, whatever you want to call it. That's a whole separate debate for another time. But dopamine has also been linked to that anticipation of, I'm going to go and I'm going to get new stuff and I'm going to fantasize about, here's the things that I could wear this outfit to, or here's all the things I could do with this thing once I buy it, is actually creating more of a dopamine surge than when you actually get those items home. It's a really interesting field of study. And this is why when a lot of people experience depression, they experience a loss of motivation and a loss of enjoyment of things that they used to find really enjoyable, because for many people, if they're experiencing depression, their dopamine levels are going down. This is why also in some physical conditions where you have dopamine problems, like in Parkinson's, a lot of times they experience depression going along with it, because as their body is experiencing the effects of reduced dopamine, so is their mind, so is their brain, and it becomes more likely to get depression. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is serotonin. Serotonin is the mood processing controller. It's involved in the processing of emotions, which affects overall mood. Serotonin contributes to feelings of well-being and happiness. And serotonin is the most commonly manipulated neurotransmitter in the pharmaceutical treatments of depression. We know that having too little serotonin doesn't automatically make you depressed, but we know that increasing your serotonin is going to help if you are depressed. It's kind of interesting the way that cycle works. If you've ever heard the term SSRI, when people are referring to an antidepressant, that's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Your book will explain that terminology. But basically what it's saying is it's increasing the serotonin available in your brain. Serotonin also plays a major role in appetite control, which is why depression and appetite are commonly linked. A lot of people, if they're experiencing a depressive episode, their appetite either goes significantly up or down. And a lot of times when people start antidepressants that are messing with their serotonin, get nauseated. It's because of that link. One last thing that we're going to talk about is endorphins. I'm at 14 minutes, so I will stop this. We'll start a part 4 video, and we'll do endorphins, and I'll give you a couple resources if you find this interesting and want to research some more practical applications.